Welcome to the Foster, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Corinne DeBray. I just joined the Foster. I'm very excited to be here. I think it's an amazing space where art and wilderness and people can come together for events like this. And I am very excited to be working with Jane, who I have the pleasure to introduce. So we are here as part of one of the first, after Tony's being here in December, the first of the 2018 series of speakers, My Travels with Tony. And what better speaker to start than with the Foster founder and funder Jane. And so rather than go into a long, lengthy introduction, she's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. She's an adjunct professor at Stanford. And she said, don't go on and on, so I will let her explain how she met Tony and some of the creation of story behind why we're all here tonight. But I'm just very happy to be here, and I'm going to cut it short and let her talk about this amazing story and her travels with Tony. Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne, very, very much. So, I have to say the process of preparing this lecture, which is the first in a series that's going to take place once a month for the rest of this year and probably into 2019, was a really nostalgic and wonderful experience for me because on a couple fronts, I've had a physical journey with Tony on the San Juan River, which I'm specifically going to talk about. But I've also had the journey of meeting Tony in 1989, and we have not been insignificant parts of each other's lives since then as we arrived today in 2018. So the story of both journeys, of how our lives have been intertwined since 1989, but also specifically this adventure on the San Juan River is really what I'm excited to share with you tonight. And as I mentioned, there's really nostalgia about both those things. And I haven't shared with my family the fact that after preparing this, I basically have decided I have to go on a river trip with my girlfriends, and we'll see how Tony Foster, I hope he fits into it, if it fits his schedule, but I know I have to go on a river trip once a year, and it's been since 2011 that I've been on the river. So I want to just say a couple things about this lecture series, which I was a little bit hoggish saying, I want to be the first one, because there are so many people that have had remarkable journeys with Tony, and several of those people are in this room tonight. Some of them are women who joined me on the San Juan River, and I'll call some of them out when I show their picture in a few moments. But we have coming up several lectures. A godson of mine who traveled with Tony to Machu Picchu is going to give a talk in February. Matthias, who works here at the foundation, traveled with Tony to Chile 2.5 years ago, and Matthias is going to give a talk about his journey with Tony. And Winslow Briggs, who led the Carnegie Institute at Stanford, is going to give a lecture on April 15th about his journey with Tony, which has many facets to it. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. So this lecture series is about specific journeys where people have traveled with Tony, but we're actually also going to bring in people to talk who've had the journey of influencing Tony's career, leaders in the art world. And so they'll talk about their journey with Tony in that context. So every month, basically these are going to be on Sunday nights. They're announced in our newsletter. And so if you don't get our newsletter, we're going to encourage you to sign up, because that and on Facebook is how you find out about these upcoming talks. We want people not to just have the pleasure of enjoying Tony's art, but we want them to get perspective on what it was like to be with him, either arranging a show of his art or being with him in the field when the art was being created. And so that's the purpose of this. So again, if you're on our mailing list already, please share it with your friends so that they can learn about these upcoming events. So to talk about a lecture series that's called My Journey with Tony, you have to start out, I think, and not every lecture is going to start the way mine does, because I'm really trying to lay the foundation for this series. And in fact, on our YouTube channel is about an hour-long talk that several of you attended in December that Tony gave, where he laid the very, very foundation for this series by talking about all his journeys and how important it was to have so many people accompany him on these journeys. My husband Kurt, who's in the room, has been on journeys. There's several other people in the room. And Tony did a great job, I think, of framing what are his journeys and how people help him. This is the photograph that you see when you walk into the Foster. Hopefully all of you have noticed it. This is the Kaitour Falls in Guyana. is part of Tony's journey called Watermarks. And this quote from Tony, "All my work is about journeys." And ironically, part of where the actual physical journey of going on the San Juan River with Tony and the creation of the Foster overlay on the fact that it was on the San Juan River trip, I saw the importance of holding Tony's journeys together, which up until that point in time, up until 2011, in order to earn a living, Tony would create a journey, but it would get broken up into pieces and end up in people's living rooms in order for him to earn a living. And so the creation of the Foster Art and Wilderness Foundation and its venue, the Foster, was really meant to address that kind of market failure. So journeys, and the word journey, you're just gonna, every time you come here, that word, you're gonna hear it over and over again. So what is a journey? There's a lot of different interpretations. I've already touched on two of them, physically traveling with Tony and my journey of being his friend and colleague as his career develops. If you go to the dictionary, you get a bunch of definitions of a journey. They're kind of interesting. They apply to a degree, particularly this idea of traveling from one place to another, usually taking a rather long time. Fits, certainly. Sometimes Tony's journeys, when he creates them, they get created over a year. Sometimes over his journey exploring beauty, he worked on over a 10-year period of time and went all over the world, as many of you already know. So we're going to use journey, that word, a lot of different ways. When you think of the Foster, and you think of the fact that Tony has created 16 journeys, he's working on his 17th right now, it's a situation where Tony's picked a theme. It could be arid lands. It could be John Muir's High Sierra. It could be watermarks. And he goes off and paints on that theme. And that body of work on that theme, philosophical or geographical or environmental, that is a journey in the context of the Foster. That's a little bit different than saying Krista and Peggy and Barb and Holly and a bunch of us, we went on a river trip, okay? That was a trip that was a mini journey, really, for us, part of Tony's bigger journey, Sacred Places, which we'll talk about. So we're just playing around a little elastically, if you will, with this idea of what's a journey. Some of you, I've met really wonderful, enthusiastic people here tonight who've said, this is my 6th time here and I brought new friends tonight. Well, you're having your own journey connecting to Tony's journeys, right? And your own journey coming and hearing these stories. So we're going to be as broad with the word journey as we possibly can. I think the reason this 14,000 square foot building exists is we need, with the help of our wonderful architects, one of whom is here tonight, and this used to be the Lucille Packard ambulance garage, is we needed a building big enough to hold 2 journeys, to show them, to feel a whole journey. And my argument, my thesis, which I discovered accidentally, quite accidentally, on the San Juan River, is that the journey, Tony's painted journey, is actually the work of art. The individual paintings all add up, and all the souvenirs, the work of art is the journey itself. So actually, I don't think Tony necessarily thought about it that way, but I think he's come around, actually. So going back, big elaborate introduction to this lecture series. My journey, we know who Mai is. Tonight it's me. It'll be Skylar in a month, and then it'll be Matthias. So my journey with Tony. So just to make sure everybody knows who Tony is. Tony Foster is an Englishman who lives in Cornwall. He's going to turn 72 soon. He's been painting in plein air watercolor wilderness journeys for about 35 years. He's very entertaining. How many people here have met Tony Foster? Okay, so you guys know Tony, all right? So there's very little I can add to that, but it's a great photograph. And one of the things I like to do, because I'm a geologist, I love maps, is I want to make sure everybody knows where Tony lives. So many of us have been to London or have some concept of where London is. I asked some of the lovely people here in the first 3 rows, had they ever watched the TV show Doc Martin? Who's watched Doc Martin? Okay, so Tony's town is really close, Tyward which is actually a parish of about 1,500 people, and his town has how many pubs? One. Okay, 1 pub town. And you could argue that some of you have seen the photographs of Tony going like this, right? When he's trying to decide what to paint. And so one of the things Tony and I have a business, and it's called MAP, and a big part of our business is thinking location. The actual specific locations really matter. For Tony, what he paints, he's very picky, right, Krista, about what he's going to paint. He spends a lot of time figuring out the location. I just want to tell you, in this one pub town of Tywardreath, Tony's house is right across the street from the one pub. Does the guy understand location or what? Okay? So he really understands location. And fortunately, for some of us, has anyone been to the Eden Project in Cornwall? Has anybody visited that? So there's a couple that Heidi has in the back. So it turns out that about 15 minutes from Tony's house is the number one destination of all of Cornwall. It's called the Eden Project, and over 1 million people visit it a year. And so out of those 1 million people, a handful actually go to Tony's pub and pop in and say hi. So we'll talk more about the Eden Project another time, but I wanted everybody to know that Tywardreath is near Doc Martin's home, and that there's one pub in Tywardreath, and this is where Tony grounds himself. Tony chooses very clearly that this is where he wants to live, in this town where everybody knows each other. And some of you may have heard me tell this story before. I got to visit Tony at Mesa Verde, where he was an artist in residence. And the ruins at Mesa Verde have been carbon dated at about 1100 AD, and they call them ruins. And I was with Tony, and he turned to me and he says, "You know what that means?" I said, "What?" He says, "I live in a ruin." So Tywardreath is very old, this part of Cornwall, and his house is dated at around 900 AD. So most of us don't think of the Anasazi ruins as being the same age as Tony's house that's across the street from the pub in Cornwall. I'm going to move us along. We're talking about Tony. So along, his center of strength is Tywardreath with his beautiful wife Anne, across the street from the pub and his local friends. But as we all know, Tony goes off into the wild and brings it back for us. I wanted to show this photograph of Tony because this is him working on the painting that's in Exploring Beauty that's near the front of this gallery, our west gallery over here. So he's working on the Denali painting. He's up at Denali. And Winslow Briggs, who's going to speak on April 15th, inspired Tony, was Tony's luminary to go paint Denali. And it was very frustrating to Tony because Denali stayed clouded for a long time. But he produced a beautiful painting. So here, just to bring home again, there's the famous pub. Here's Tony, his beautiful wife Anne, and our artistic director, Kristen Poole, who actually lives in Sun Valley but works virtually with us here. And those biodomes in the back are at the Eden Project, which I encourage you to look up and learn a bit about. On your left-hand side are 2 photographs of Tony's studio, which is a sacred, special place. And my nickname for Tony's studio is Mary Poppins' Purse, because it's very, very small. It's beautifully organized, all his brushes and artifacts and souvenirs, but he produces a whole journey out of a very, very small space. So if you're ever in the neighborhood, we can see if we can, find a way to arrange for you to check out the pub and Tony's studio. We've got to be a little careful that there's not a stampede, but it's a very special place. So this map is different than the one that you experience in the Western alcove when you first walk into our lobby. And our lobby is meant to give you a sense of, well, what is the Foster and who's this guy Tony? And wow, there he is on the Kaitour Falls. But there's some important dots on the map. Obviously, there's a dot in Great Britain on the Cornwall coast, and that's where Tony's based. Okay? Then you see the general red dot all the way to the far west, which is Palo Alto. And many of you read in our newsletter that Tony has been an artist in residence at Montalvo 3 times. It started in the mid-'80s, even before I'd met Tony, and I met Tony in 1989. So Tony actually has long-standing roots in the Bay Area that we're honored and thrilled to build on and celebrate. Then you see that dot, which is meant to be in Idaho, and it turns out that Tony has had deep relationships with the art and collector community in Sun Valley, Idaho for the last 30 years. Some really, really interesting people, and I'll highlight a few of them in a few moments. And his first big break in the States was his second journey was called Thoreau Country. And through a set of wonderful connections, it opened at the Yale Center for British Art. So early in Tony's career, in the mid-1980s, his first big ta-da in the States, other than Montalvo, was the Yale Center for British Art. And we're thrilled for Tony because today, 30 years later, the Yale Center for British Art has asked for Tony to make a gift to their permanent collection. And Tony has some Grand Canyon paintings that will be celebrated and kind of inducted into Yale's collection later this year. So when you think of Tony, here's this guy in this one pub town with this place dedicated to his work in Palo Alto, but I wanted to highlight a couple of the other important locations. And obviously, if you've looked at the map in the alcove, Tony's traveled and painted all over the world. I like to think when you look at all the paintings he's created, well over half of them are in the Western US, even though he has had a global reach. So when you think of Tony and what he stands for and why he's been such an important part of my life, it's his commitment to going to the places that we are too busy to go, or we can't go, we're too busy, there isn't access. Tony ends up sometimes arranging very special access to very pristine places, and he gets to bring them back for us. And this is a quote from Tony talking about what's important to him about the places that he goes. So, at the core of what is or who is Tony, sharing some of these quotes with you is important. This is an image from, again, our alcove that is meant to highlight the fact that one of the things that people who don't know Tony's work first kind of go, is that he is known as a watercolor artist, and now he's known, something that really distinguishes him is he creates journeys that are largely capturing a journey that he goes on through watercolor paintings, but a very unique thing that he does are these souvenirs. And so often I get people coming and saying, wow, I just love those souvenirs. I mean, I love the watercolor painting, but could I just take those souvenirs home with me? They're so interesting. And those souvenirs have multiple purposes for Tony. Often they're used, if you read about them in the catalog or try and read his handwriting or the label, they're describing what happened and who was with him at the place. But the actual artifacts that he uses or that he creates are meant to be symbolic of what the place meant to him on a very personal level. So I have to say that one of the most common questions, other than why did you do this, creating the Foster, but one of the most common questions about Tony's work is, well, doesn't he take photographs? And Tony, that's just a core thing from the first few times I met him. Tony does not take photographs of anything that he paints. If you study his paintings, you'll see the pencil work that he does and all the notes that he leaves to himself. But this ends up being one of my favorite quotes because there are many artists, and it's perfectly fine to do it. It's just a different approach, who do some work in the field, take photographs, and then use the photographs to enhance what they do when they get back to their studio. I think many of you have probably heard that Tony paints in the neighborhood of a half. It depends. Sometimes he'll paint 2/3 of a painting in the field, sometimes 40%. So I'll just pick roughly a half, but he does a lot of finish work of his paintings in his studio, in Mary Poppins Purse back in Tywardreath. So I think another thing that's really distinct about Tony is it's his personal choice to do this, but he also can be, you'll meet him after he's just had a kind of a traumatic situation in terms of the conditions that he's under, and you're like, ooh, yeah, but Tony, this is the life you choose. So a distinctive part of his work is he puts himself sometimes into some fairly extreme conditions. Let's watch this brief video.
I think that people perhaps don't quite realise, the amount of effort that goes into making some of these paintings. The painting, for example, from the Emigrant Trail looking down on the San Juan River, which is a big painting, 4'6" by 3 feet. First of all, it's very, very difficult to get to where I wanted to put my tent up, which is under a cottonwood tree next to the river, because it was so ferociously hot that I just needed some shade sometime, midday. And then after that, having pitched my tent and set myself up, I then walked up to where the Emigrant Trail took off, which is 500 feet, a 500 feet scramble up a rock slide, really. It's difficult enough for me to haul my drawing board, my aluminium tube, my paper, my stove, my water, all the things that I need during the day, 500 feet up this thing, and then sit in the baking heat every day. Sometimes the heat on the rock I was sitting on was 115 degrees. You get the wind blowing, you get storms, you get insects. It's either too hot or it's too cold or it's too windy or deserts are difficult places. So this tremendous sandstorm built up, and I had to lie in my tent for, 12 hours, getting gradually covered in sand. My drawing board was lashed to trees and rocks, and when the wind died down, I went back to find out what had happened, to find that my drawing board had been absolutely shredded, torn up like cardboard into about 8 different sheets and scattered across the landscape.
So I saw Tony right after this happened, and he's like, I'm just gonna throw this drawing board away, it's been ruined, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, we need it to put it in our display case so people know what your drawing board looks like. We have kind of in our storeroom, we have a collection of like Tony's old boots and different things from, everybody's like, Jane, what are you doing? But it's like trying to help people understand what the circumstances are like for Tony. So just bringing, I'm still working on this idea of what's a journey and what's a journey, who's Tony, what's a journey with Tony, and I'm going to get to my journeys with Tony in just a moment. But all of you, when you sat down, and you don't need to take these with you, but this idea of a journey, we have this little brochure that's, opens up like an accordion, and I really like, in the beginning, there's this page right here, and it says, 1 artist, 1 paint box, 1 paint board, 1 dozen brushes, 35 years, 16 journeys, 532 paintings, 18 states, 15 countries, thousands of tea breaks. Thousands, every 2 or 3 hours. If he doesn't get it, he short circuits. It's adorable. And countless footsteps. So needless to say, it's an incredible body of work, 16 journeys, and a 17th one that's in its earliest stages of being created, which we're very excited about. So many of you have seen this list before, and I don't want to, I think this range of, Tony started out with, I didn't know of this book that's by Robert Louis Stevenson that many of you probably know, and it's called Travels Without a Donkey in the Cevennes. And so Tony went and followed Robert Louis Stevenson's trail. Then he went to Thoreau Country and did not realize that that show would end up at Yale, which was fantastic. And Paul Mellon ended up buying some of the paintings out of it, and it began this process of the journeys being broken up and collectors cherry picking out the ones they liked most, rather than saying, how do we keep the journey together? John Muir's High Sierra, that's where my husband Kurt and I first encountered Tony's work at the Smithsonian, and we'll come back to that in a moment. Then Tony was dared by Bill Brace, who the big Grand Canyon painting in the lobby, not in the lobby, excuse me, in the beauty gallery, that big, giant, beautiful painting of the Grand Canyon is to honor Bill, who was head of the geology department at MIT, and Tony was like, I don't really want to go to the Grand Canyon. I don't know what it is. I live in Tyradreth, and Bill kind of dared and bribed him to go, and the Grand Canyon ends up being, as a trivia question, everybody should know, the subject that Tony has painted most is the Grand Canyon over the course of all his work. So that was a good bet and a good dare. Arid lands was deserts, and you see that eventually Tony ended up going underwater as part of Watermarks, but he went down to Costa Rica, and Tony has said to me he has more friends that are scientists than artists. And a lot of these scientists have opened up the ideas for Tony of where his journey should lead him. So one of his best friends is one of the world-renowned experts on mosquitoes. And that gentleman got him to the Kaitour Falls that's in that photograph in the entryway, but also got him into the rainforests of Costa Rica. Out of Tony's 16 journeys, 4 are Idaho-centric, again, going back to the fact that he has such a strong collector base and strong connection with the Sun Valley Center for the Arts. So I'll just scoot, so the Sun Valley Center for the Arts commissioned after Lewiston Clark, which was fantastic for Tony. Watermarks is his biggest journey in terms of the number of paintings, over 70 paintings. The whole salmon was a point in time I went to Sun Valley, so the Sun Valley Center for the Arts commissioned the whole salmon. It was 31 paintings of the whole Salmon River, and it was beautiful. It was stunning. It was intact, a very coherent journey. It ended up in about 25 people's living rooms. So one of my fantasies actually is we'll figure out how to reunite that. It was just beautiful. And that was one of the times where I early on was recognizing, boy, the power of the journey is so much bigger than any of the, a couple of the individual paintings. So here's some of the next journeys from Tony. And the last 2 here, Sacred Places and Exploring Beauty, are here at the Foster. We love sharing with everyone. And we're excited that Searching for a Bigger Subject, we've had the Museum of Northern Arizona has reached out to us wanting to reunite that journey to honor the 100th anniversary of the Grand Canyon National Park. So we'll keep our readership up to date as that exhibition comes to bear. There's Tony in Borneo painting in the rainforest. So now, finally, after that great prelude, we're going to talk about my journey. So my 2 journeys with Tony. So this is really the image that kicks off my personal journey with Tony, which Kurt and I were in the Smithsonian the only time we've ever been there in our lives, and super excited to be there. Had no idea, never heard of Tony Foster, had no idea there was an exhibition, and it really was at the back of the Natural History Museum at the Smithsonian, and it ambushed us. It was just like, wow, And John Muir's High Sierra, for many of us here in California, we may not have done the whole John Muir Trail, but many of us have been exposed to this breathtaking country. And seeing this amazing 30-plus paintings of John Muir's High Sierra was one of the most powerful when you think back of it. Some of you, it's a symphony or an opera or a rock concert or whatever it was that moved your soul, or some beautiful sculpture. But for me, when I saw John Muir's High Sierra, it just knocked me over. And so part of what really, when you get right back to it, what inspired me to do this is I want to stage that earthquake of the soul, of thinking about this for other people, and hopefully that'll work out. But this is where it all began, and this painting is the first Tony Foster painting we ever acquired, and it's on the wall straight back there. It's in view if you turn around and look. So, and I just love it. And I'm a geologist by training. It has little baggies full of rocks on it, so, you know, and little maps and cross sections and a beautiful painting. So the Souvenirs, you know, definitely resonated for me, as well as the painting itself. So, by the way, that was in 1989. Okay, so that's where my personal journey began. And by 2011, so this is the cover photo for Tony's 15th journey, Sacred Places in the American Southwest. And so this is 22 years later. And Kurt and I and friends and other people who love Tony have been talking to him about this journey. And when Tony was contemplating sacred places, actually, he originally thought of painting sacred places all over the world. And a gaggle of us helped Tony. It was his decision, but we helped him hem it in to say, well, you know, there's actually plenty to paint in the Four Corners area. And why don't we give this theme of geographic landforms that are sacred to multiple groups of people, in this case, the Mormons, the Catholics, the Navajo, the Paiute, and other Native American tribes, you know, why don't we give it some geographic coherence? And so I'd been part of conversations about all the possible places. Oh, this is the photograph of Tony. This is the color version of the black and white version you see at the opening of Sacred Places in our East Gallery, where these are the goosenecks of the San Juan, and Tony's looking out at Monument Valley. So this color version and the black and white version are kind of this is like the gateway to his Sacred Places journey. This is the map that many of you have seen that shows all the places, and we got to talk to Tony about a lot of these places as a geologist and a person of the West myself. It's like, oh, Tony, you got to go here, think about this, talking to other people. But my mother's family's from Utah, and my uncle and my cousin had brought me to Bluff. How many people have been to Bluff in the room? We got a handful. There we go. If you haven't been there, I'm going to encourage you to consider this part of the world. So Bluff is right in the southeast corner of Utah, right near the Four Corners. And my cousin and my uncle had brought me, and I'd done like 2-day or 3-day San Juan River trips before, but I'd never done the whole thing. And in general, the San Juan River trip, the most people do is an 8-night trip. So, and there ends up being transportation days on either end. And I'd wanted to do it. And when I looked at all the other places Tony was going, I really felt, so here's the San Juan River in here, and there's Bluff, and we ended up over here. And all the other places Tony was going, I really felt like this would fill a gap that he had relative to all the other places you see on the wall here that he went as part of Sacred Places. So when you think of why the San Juan River is part of Sacred Places, well, I thought it would fill a gap in the portfolio of places, the sites that Tony was going. I thought that he would, nowhere else in Sacred Places in that journey was he including essentially a mini journey on a river. And Tony had done many other rivers, so I thought he might enjoy it. An interesting part about the San Juan River is that it allows you, when you're on the river trip, you get to see ruins that you otherwise can't have other access to. And Tony's not really interested in man-made things, in painting those. I mean, I think he's personally interested, but I knew those would not be the things that Tony painted. I have to admit I got a little bit selfish about this, which is I wanted to travel with Tony. And I didn't really want to carry a backpack. I kind of liked the idea of handsome river guides doing all the cooking, because I usually was having to deal with, Mom, what's for dinner? What are we doing? Who's going to do the dishes? Blah, blah, blah. Who's driving to soccer? All that stuff. The idea of escaping myself and being with Tony and being on the river. And I think one of the key bonuses was that I knew that on a river trip, I could say to Tony, hey, I'll underwrite the river trip. I think you're going to find wonderful things to paint as part of Sacred Places, because it is a sacred river, which I'll talk about in just a moment. And I'm going to bring my girlfriends. So this shows Bluff, it shows Medicine Hat in the lower left, and that was the first chunk of the trip. So it's 4 nights in the first chunk and 4 nights. So here's then Medicine Hat and the river. You see those goosenecks and the meandering. And then at Clay Hills. So all in all, it was a 8-night trip. I had a bunch of wonderful girlfriends come with me. Only a few did the whole trip with me and Tony. And I guess part of the reason to show you this Google Earth imagery of it is to show you, there weren't trees really to speak of. It was very arid, it was very hot, it was windy, it was beautiful. And as you'll see in a few moments, for those of you that have not been on the San Juan River, some people when they hear river trip, they go, oh my God, that's scary. I think a 1.5 rating rapid is the scariest thing on the San Juan River. This is a float trip, this is a Zen trip. So to me, this seemed like, ooh, I get to be with Tony. I guess before I said, why do this? This was a way I could be with Tony. And in all the years, the 22 years I'd known him, my friends and my husband had traveled with him while he was off painting, but I'd never had the opportunity. So this seemed like a great combination. So who went with me on the river? We had 2 river guides. This is Ian and Paul, were our river guides who I did not list here on this slide, but otherwise it's me and Tony, and I know Krista Gannon's here today. Krista, is anyone else here from the river trip? Excellent, I'm thrilled you're here. So Krista and Peggy, and is Barb there too? Yes. So did we have a good time? Yes. Oh yeah, okay, good. It was a remarkable trip, and you're going to see a little bit more of it in just a few moments. So this is a beautiful, beautiful place. So that was another reason to go, was that it is such a beautiful place. And I am actually going to read you something from the Sacred Places catalog that I'm not even sure my river babes, that's what we called each other, we were the river babes. Not Tony and not Paul and not Ian, but the women, we were the river babes. So in the Sacred Places catalog, because it couldn't just be a boondoggle for Jane and her friends, it needed to be a sacred place. So the most important, I'm reading about a section in the catalog called Spiritual Landmarks. The most important of the sacred rivers, the San Juan, has many names, including Old Age River, Male Water, and Long Body. From its source in the southwestern Colorado, it runs along the southern slopes of the San Juan Mountains and to the west of the Continental Divide. The Navajo describe it as a white-haired old man, a flash of lightning, a club to protect the Navajo from invaders, and a huge serpent whose body is coiled in the goosenecks, a particularly twisted part of the river. Inside the river lives a holy being who serves as a guardian, protecting those who pray to him as they cross the river out of their homeland. So in a lot of, and there's some more in here about the importance of the San Juan River to the Mormons as well, but it ended up being a very therapeutic and fun river adventure for we river babes. Tony produced some beautiful paintings that I'll talk more about in a moment, but I think we were all humbled, right, Krista, by the place. It really, really is magnificent, and I encourage you. It's a very family-friendly trip. So how? I've talked about who went and why we did it and some of those things, but how did we get around? It was a wonderful combination of these kayaks and rafts that had all our gear on them, the rafts were managed by our river guides. So a little bit luxury sleeping environments. So hopefully some of you have had the chance in your lives to go on a river trip. If you haven't, again, this is I think people who are 90 years old, honestly, could cheerfully go on the San Juan River. It's a very comfortable, easy, friendly trip. So very nice sandbars to sleep on. As I mentioned, it was 8 days where I didn't have to think about what was for dinner. I could be tasked with what to cut. Someone has a question.
I was just curious what time of year.
Oh, we were in May of 2011. Thank you for asking. Yeah, mid-May. It was a beautiful time to go. And I think it does matter which time of year you go, and I'm happy to circulate, there's a couple different river companies that I hadn't looked in 7 years, but I'm ready to go back. It was wonderful. So this shows you kind of the library of where we would have a quiet time after a long day goofing off in the river, and Tony was off painting. We'd set up our little river chairs and hang out and talk with each other. So I'm just showing you it's really stressful being on a journey with Tony. Okay, I want you, I can't quite tell, it might have even, yeah, this might even be a snapshot of cocktail hour. If you look closely, there might be a bottle of wine that's open. So this is as tough as it gets. These are the biggest rapids on the San Juan, okay? I just wanted to let you know what life-threatening situation we put ourselves. You know, that whole thing of extreme conditions and the windstorm, that was after we left. That little clip was when Tony was working on this painting over here, which he went back to on the trip. So, but you can see just beautiful, beautiful landscape and not too terrifying a rapid. So one of the reasons to include this kind of aerial photo is to emphasize the fact that our routine was that each day we were on the river, we would go off and go hiking, and we would leave Tony behind to make, and as you'll see, there's these 8 paintings behind Caitlin in the back there. Every day on the river, Tony captured, he captured the journey, the mini journey on the San Juan. And so we'd go off and go hiking, which was usually straight up. Our river guides would take us up and leave Tony to do his thing, and then we'd come down. It was like, what did you do? You know, it was so exciting to see what Tony had for show and tell at the end of the day. So this is a particularly wonderful photograph of one of the river babes, my friend Barb Wyndham and Tony. And I guess we'd like to call out the fact that this was not atypical. We had a lot of laughter, a lot of smiles. I would have to say that anybody that was in a boat with me was very frustrated because I could never quite get that coordination going that these two have. Look how beautifully synchronized they are. I was usually the one kind of going in circles, you know, and going off to the right. But really, we have lots of wonderful photographs like this one, and it's just a great one. Seeing Tony, if Tony was here right now, he'd crack a bunch of jokes about what it was like having an estrogen overdose, being around all these women in the 50s. But we made sure that he had some really good therapeutic laughter. So now I have the opportunity, thanks to my dear friend Krista Gannon, who's here, and Matthias Lanus, who Krista made a 30-minute movie about our river trip, which was a lost between all of us. None of us could find it, and we just found it on Thursday. And Matthias quickly pared down the 30 minutes to about 6 minutes of serious content, and then there are some silly bloopers at the end that I want to share with you.
I'm here to bump you up.
They get together, squishing. Awesome, okay.
there when those were coming through?
Well, I must admit, I turned round to do it because they were mostly forming over there, so yeah, mixed together. And then just tie all that together, sort of thing. Thank you. Good. What a great audience you are.
Coordinated.
Oh. Ooh, gorgeous. Oh wow, I like that one. That's powerful. Oh my gosh. That's great. That is good work, Fox. Oh, thank you.
I met Tony somewhere around 86, 87. This is the first time I've been out with him in anything resembling wilderness since then. So that's a huge achievement in and of itself. So one might ask, other than learning how to beer bob and tow fish, what else came out of this journey? So clearly they don't practice beer bobbing in Cornwall. Did you notice that? He's really good at drinking tea, but he had not practiced beer bobbing before. So this is me and Tony at the end of the trip. And I think one of the most important achievements of this particular journey, which I don't think, or mini journey within, it was the River Babes journey with Tony Foster, right? This was not all of Sacred Places. This was this little bit. Is we had a hell of a lot of fun. We giggled a lot. I think it was therapeutic for everybody. But some really, really important things came out of this trip as well. So we had a lot of fun. I think certainly going back and revisiting all of this, we have some incredible memories. But 10 paintings came out of this 10 days together, 8 days on the river, the other two ends. So the 8 paintings that you see on the wall back there, but part of what was really important for Tony, and I think it's one of the things people are interested in about how he works, is on the river, he made a commitment to make a painting every day, and he went through a very rigorous process of deciding what he was going to paint every day, and we really had nothing to do with it. But on a few of the days, he did hike with us up to the rim, and certainly at the beginning of our trip, it was a very dramatic entrance. And so the painting you see on the wall right over here, which I'm going to get the title of it right, it's called From Immigrant Trail on Corn Ridge, I think, looking southwest to Mule's Ears and the San Juan Canyon. Tony saw this very early on our river trip, and he says, I'm coming back. And so that's where he encountered those extraordinary winds that were in the extreme video. And so after we left, he did that big painting, and then the one to its left, which is called From East Muley Point, looking east to the Goosenecks and to Monument Valley, so that second large well, the large painting there in the middle, those were both paintings that the view, he would go like, oh my God, I've got to come back and do this. It was not one of those things he calculated. So we did a big hike from the river up to that view of that middle painting. And when he did that with us, he said, I'm coming back after you guys leave. And so we, from my point of view, our journey with Tony produced 8 San Juan River paintings, and then it produced these 2 big paintings that he did after we left. So there, sorry, I should have been showing these. There's the 8 San Juan River paintings. There's the 2 big ones that I mentioned. So you noticed in Krista's video the film footage of this image of Tony on his little stool out on a rock, not quite in the middle of the river, but a lot further into the river than most of us would go to create a painting, right? Hard to see there, but he has his super high-tech backpacking stove that my husband Kurt gave him, because remember, he's out there for more than 3 hours, and that requires at least 1 cup of tea. So he's very self-sufficient. He doesn't go anywhere without the stove, the cup, and his teacup has the handle taken off because he's such a minimalist and he has his tea. So he's out there, and actually I took this photograph. I was off screen, took this one of the days, well into our trip. I said to my girlfriends and the guys, I said, you all go. I want to stand back. I just want to have some quiet time, as we've been laughing so hard and hiking so hard. I just wanted a day to be. And I decided that part of what I wanted to do is just watch Tony and observe him and think. And I was aware of the fact that because, interestingly, between being ambushed by him at the Smithsonian and this trip, I had developed an addiction, and that was collecting Tony Foster's art. And it turns out at that point, I'd become the largest collector of his paintings. And I knew that when Sacred Places, which you see here, when it came, Tony's gallery at the time was the Gerald Peters Gallery in Santa Fe, which is a very prominent art gallery. And I knew that when it showed and opened, that I was going to have, because of some things I'd done for Tony, and I was going to have first pick of the show. And I was looking at Tony out there. I'd been on the river with him. I'd seen many of these paintings that were already created, and I got sick to my stomach. I just didn't like the idea of the Sacred Places journey being broken up. So I'm now reverting to my personal journey with Tony that started at the Smithsonian. And what happened on the San Juan River was this extraordinary experience with my girlfriends and the 2 guides and with Tony. And what happened there. But towards the end of this journey, I got ambushed by the thought that I needed to keep Sacred Places together. And not for me personally, but to share it. Because for me, this part, the Sacred Places of the Four Corners, resonates so powerfully with people, not just people of the West, like Robin Dunbar, who's here, who I know loves this country as much as I do, and many of the rest of you do too. But it was coherent, and I wanted it held together. So out of the blue, I did not go on this river trip thinking this. Out of the blue, I started talking to Tony, and I said, you know what? I want to figure out how to acquire the whole journey, not for me, but for public benefit. And the easy path would have been to find a museum in the Four Corners area that if I acquired it, that I could just give it to them. Well, have many of you dealt with museums very much? They have this little problem. They have tons of art and not very much real estate, right? So if I had given it to them, they would have said, great, we'll put it in storage and we'll show it again in 20 years. Well, where's the opportunity for those personal earthquakes like happened to me at the Smithsonian if it's in storage? So I actually tried to find some museums and see if they would be interested. And they said, oh yeah, wow, Sacred Place is really beautiful, blah, blah, blah. We have no place to put it. And so between 2011 and 2016, when we opened here, was a quite exhausting and challenging and interesting process of trying to figure out how to create a place. So we created, from an entity point of view, we created the Foster Art and Wilderness Foundation, which is a very long name, but it's really the vehicle where the funding and the resources were placed by me to create a place, a venue where people could experience full journeys like Sacred Places and Beauty, which you see here today. So this moment, watching Tony painting in the middle of the river, was where my headspace went to, I have to hold Sacred Places together. So sometimes, there's the mission of the Foster, which we'll talk about in a moment, but like some of the other things in my life, I feel like this all got created because I threw myself in front of the train, if you will, of not wanting to see Sacred Places being broken up. And then from there, all these other things have come to pass. So this was a pretty important, my journey with Tony, these two journeys intertwined, have been pretty important to me and have resulted in this place. So the Foster, where what we celebrate are watercolor exhibitions of wilderness journeys. This is an unabashed, quick sales pitch for everybody around the fact that, why, after I threw myself in front of the train and said I'm holding sacred places together, which was very confusing for Tony to get his arms around, and he had to ask all his other collectors to stand back, which was a tricky, pivot for everybody. But we've managed to get everybody on board. This is basically the mission statement of the Foster. And our goal is, it's really a lot of fancy words around the fact that I would like to have people have their own version of what happened to me at the Smithsonian. And we've had all kinds of conversations about what the Foster is becoming, other than a place that people can use for events and things like that. With Tony's help, we brought wilderness into a space that is temperature controlled and shields us from the rain. So if you want some wilderness and you're over at Google or someplace like that and you want to come over here, you can do it without getting wet and getting outdoors. All kinds of thoughts about it. People share their thoughts clearly. So there's the physical aspect of the Foster. We talked about the philosophical. I want to make sure everybody understands there's really 4 galleries from my point of view. There's the lobby, which attempts, and we're actually going to renovate it a little bit to try and make it even clearer who Tony is and what this place is about. And then we have beauty, sacred places, and for those of you that haven't followed the trail posts in the back, there basically are paintings, 1 or 2 paintings from all Tony's prior journeys, 1 through 14. So to try and give you a sense of how his art and his journeys have evolved over time. The Foster is not just physical and philosophical, it's a team of remarkable people. Corinne recently joined us, so we're thrilled. She's shown there in the middle, and you've met hopefully some of these other people. I'll call out Kristen Poole here on the upper left, who is also the artistic director for the Sun Valley Center for the Arts and has known Tony for, almost 30 years. And she's a fantastic member of our team. We have, these are all people with the exception of Karen Kinzel, who many of you already know, who leads our Palo Alto Art Center. All the other people besides Karen are people that were already attached to Tony when we created the Foster. And really a condition of creating the Foster is he wanted them to be advisors to us. And they all have been really helpful in a variety of ways, including I'll call out Duncan Robinson, who it doesn't mention here. He was in charge of the Yale Center for British Art at the time that Tony's first show in the States, Thoreau Country, opened there. So all these people have a lot of history with Tony, and about 4 of them are based in Sun Valley, again, which is an important hub for Tony's collectors and advisors. We're excited about the fact, and many of you are already part of this process, which is we have many community partnerships. Specifically, we're interested in celebrating art and wilderness, and so organizations that share that mission, but we've reached out broadly to educators of all grade levels, from university down to preschool, and we're always interested in you helping with that, because it seems everybody knows at least 3 teachers. So we'll talk about that more in a moment. But we're interested in all of you helping us build partnerships in the community with organizations that can benefit from this space. So sharing the Foster is, we got it built, and we have this wonderful staff, but if you build it, they will come. We need everybody's help to do that, so I apologize for the infomercial. We have bookmarks you can grab by the fistful that give our basic information and are fun to share. And these are things that can be placed in people's doctor's offices, in their bookstores. We have little holders to hold these bookmarks to pass around. We have catalogs that many of you have seen, and they're available as PDFs online. We love people getting on our mailing list because that's how you get to hear. We have watercolor classes coming up here. We're building out more and more program, and the main way to find out about it actually is being on our mailing list or following us on Facebook. We have these educator packets. So of those 3 teachers you know, and if you haven't done so already, we'd love to give you these educator packets to pass to them so they can bring their classes here. I'm going to be around for questions. I'd like to, Krista, can you stand up so you can see the other river babes? So Krista, be happy, and Peggy and Barb, where are you? Can you guys come up here? Come up here. Come on. Come on up. I need these beautiful babes. And all the other babes wanted to be here, but they had reasons why they couldn't come. So, hey, baby. Hey, baby. So, here we are, 7 years later, right? Isn't it incredible? So I think these women would join me in urging you, if there's any way to go on a journey with Tony, which is pretty tricky to schedule. It took me 22 years to figure it out. But I think one of the great things about a journey with Tony is it inspires you to go off on journeys of your own. So I think one of the things I would hope out of this lecture tonight is, which is kind of not really a lecture, it's a little chat, right? Is to encourage, enjoy Tony's art, but hopefully his art and the lecture tonight inspires you to go out into nature and have your own journeys in it, whatever they might be.